So hello everyone, welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by Nathan Faudree, who's the writer-director of Site 13, a new horror film that's being distributed. So just welcome, first of all. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so it's an absolute privilege. I was just saying to you off recording there that I'm kind of one of the first few people to actually log this film on Letterboxd, which is quite a pleasure. I quite find a lot of pleasure of finding films that I can then pass on and recommend to people, and those
That,
those indie films that don't really have that kind of big distribution. It's quite nice to be one of the first.
that's awesome. Yeah, no, I I appreciate it. I mean, of course, anybody who makes a movie, like that's the point is for people to watch it. So anyone who does is it's always wonderful thing. So cool.
Yeah. So before we get on to Site 13, I kind of wanted to get a bit from yourself about yourself, really. Like, what's your background? How did you get into filmmaking? What sort of maybe staying away from the specifics of this film, but kind of just generally speaking, what was your kind of background, your introduction into filmmaking?
Yeah, I actually started I came at filmmaking from an acting standpoint. As an actor, like, doing the usual thing of going out there, doing plays, doing auditions, doing all of that.
Yeah.
And in the early 2000s, during the whole DVD, direct to DVD boom,
Hmm.
I started getting involved in horror movies. And I've always been a fan of horror movies as a genre. I mean, I love like all genre films kind of thing. But getting involved with horror movies was just really fun. And I mean, the thing is though is that DVD boom went away, and also the like so not only like a lot of the opportunities went away, but what was happening is a lot of the independent films that I was involved with, it would only go up to a certain point. Like they would film the movie, they would edit it, they would put it together, you'd have a little premiere, and everybody get together and go, "Yay, we made a movie!" And then that's it, you
Yeah.
know, like no distribution, no anything else. And so at a certain point, I got tired of that. I had a few that went to distribution. And yeah, so at a certain point, I'd been writing all along the entire time. And so yeah, no, at a certain point I decided to call in all my favors and just make a movie. Because I figured I'd been on set enough. I kind of knew what I was doing. I was like, all right, I got this. And yeah, no, I did not. Spoiler alert, I had to figure a lot out. It was not easy, but yeah, I mean that's the point of it, was that I started from that acting standpoint.
Yeah, and like that's kind of a nice segue then into the film itself. Then, so obviously this film, what 17 years in the making, I believe, was the kind
Yeah, I
of
mean,
overall like from start conception to.
with it when it coming out,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Um,
what was that like then? Obviously, when I was watching this film and having sort of had reflected on it for the past couple of days since I watched it, I kind of just I thought of two films immediately came to mind. One was completely different genre, which was Boyhood, the Richard Linklater film,
yep, yep,
which obviously was filmed over a number of years. And then obviously, then you have films like Romero's The Amusement Park,
yep,
which is recently been released and was, lost almost to time and refound and rediscovered the footage, and that's been released since. That's obviously in the horror genre. So what
absolutely.
what was this entire process like for you? Because obviously you were an actor in the original found footage, and you've now gone on to write and direct the kind of more modern component. So what was that like from a personal perspective?
Well, let me see. So I had worked with Tony Urban, who was the director of the original found footage. We'd worked on a couple different indie films before, and he had one that had gotten released called Cottontail, in which I play a genetically altered mutant killer Easter bunny.
Right.
So my mother was very proud with all my Shakespeare classes that she was like, "Oh, this is what you studied Shakespeare for, huh?" Um, very right. So we had a little bit of success, and he had wanted to do a found footage film. So we got together and we came up with the concept, and all of that was all improvised. So we did that over the course of like one weekend, shot it, and there was a lot of interesting ideas that really popped up in it.
Right.
And I went back to New York. We all went our separate ways. And after a little bit, Tony kind of got tired of making movies and retired. He went on to become like a brilliant novelist now and photographer. So he left the business and just was like, I'm done. But over the years, I had been like thinking about it because I was like, there's some really interesting things in that found footage stuff. Yeah. And then a few years ago, I was doing a play, and they have this thing in theater where the actors call it post-show depression. So basically, like when you're done with a show, you've been working so hard on it, and then it just stops.
Right.
And everybody just goes, crushing depression. And I was doing Macbeth, and I was like, this is the role. So if I don't have something to do after this, my post-show depression is going to be just like, that's it, I'm done. So I had still been thinking about this. And so I reached out and I got in touch with Tony, and I said, hey, do you have that footage? Because I have an idea. And he was like, yep, I got it on a hard drive somewhere. So he went and he got it. And I told him my idea. I said, look, I want to, like, because the original found footage had like these Lovecraftian kind of vibe to it. H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of the way H.P. Lovecraft like structures a lot of his stories is two old guys get together, and like one of them tells them, well, there was this one time when this weird, creepy, other worldly god thing came, and so I decided I was going to structure it kind of like that, but instead of having them tell a story, we'd use the old tapes as flashback. Which then meant that I had, since I had acted in the original, that I had to play in the present day stuff. But so I went and I wrote it out, and I had a couple friends who I had done some free work on their movies. I showed them the script. They said, this is great, let's shoot it. I was like, oh, okay, cool, let's do that. I was thinking I'm kind of getting around something here. I've only got to shoot half a movie and then make a movie. So I'm like, I'm half the work. Which did not end up being the case at all.
Probably more like double the work, right? In the end, with all the integration and writing around the existing content.
Yeah. And so like the actual filming of it was it was stressful as hell. It was, because like, of course we were approaching this with no budget. So it was like, let's go. What do we have?
Yeah.
And just start working. And the funny thing is that the woman who plays Catherine, the lead, I had written a part with her in mind. I said, hey, I wrote you this part. She's like, that sounds great. I have this week available in August. And I guess, oh, okay, that's when we're making the movie.
Right.
A month away. So so we just jumped in and started making a movie. And then a lot of it is just figuring it out as we went along. And then after, it was sort of like then the post-production ended up taking so long because essentially we ended up having to edit the movie 3 times. Right. Like we had to edit the old footage together, we had to edit the new footage together, and then we had to edit those 2 films together, one final film. So and I was going to get out of this with no work at all of a sudden became way more work than I thought possible. So
yeah, I mean, that found footage aspect I thought was fascinating, because usually in found footage horror films, or just found footage in general, you've kind of got, that's it, right? That's the film. The found footage is the film. That's how it's presented. That's the kind of content. Here it was like the found footage was like almost like a plot device in itself, and kind of then like influenced and established the kind of setting and what was happening in the present day period. What was that like then? Because that's quite just from personal experience of watching films, that was quite a niche, unique way of using found footage.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, because like when I looked at the footage, it was like 13 years old, 13 years old at that point.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it, but digital footage is still going to degrade too, like as far as like the quality of the several different transfers and everything like that. So it looked, damaged, which actually looked great for the movie. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, this is great. Um, and it ended up helping us in the editing process because we could, any footage that didn't necessarily work or any cuts that we had, we could hide it in the damage of the footage.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, like we ended up using pretty much every form of digital media that's available right now. Like the original footage was shot on the original digital video cameras that recorded to tape.
Right.
Uh, and then the present day was shot on DSLRs and 4K.
Hmm.
And then we also shot on some of the original, like little Elf. Remember the Elf cameras, the ones that had the first digital cameras, and they could do a little bit of footage.
Right.
So we used those as well. And really, as we were putting it together, was when the aesthetic and the idea of like one type of footage sort of bleeding over into all of the other
Hmm.
stuff ended up happening. It was like the movie evolved from the script,
Right.
and I think part of like the process of filmmaking is being open to those ideas as it goes along. And because we had no money to like just go, oh, we'll fix it in post, we had to come up with like a real explanation as to why it was that doing that.
Right, yeah. And when you mentioned that about in terms of like the script evolving and the film evolving as you were shooting and editing and stuff like that, obviously you said a lot of the original found footage was improvised, pretty much completely improvised. What about the modern footage? Was that completely scripted or was there still some improvisation in there?
That was completely scripted.
Completely, okay.
Yeah. I wrote out that script, and I wrote it out based on what I remembered of the
Right,
old. Like I didn't even have the old footage at that point when I
right,
was script. So there was some stuff that ended up not being in the old footage like I thought it was.
hmm,
And so once we had gone through everything that we had, then we had to sort of like massage some of the old footage and play around with a little bit
right.
uh, to make the two pieces match.
Yeah. On the flip side, that's quite interesting as well from a filmmaking perspective that you had to recollect what you could remember from the original footage in a film that you're playing a character, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, called Nathan.
Yeah,
So it was quite interesting as well from your personal perspective, writing dialogue for your character, which is about remembering what you can remember from the original footage before you even shot the new footage. I think that's really interesting as well.
absolutely. It got a little meta.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I mean, and the funny thing is that I keep forgetting that I'm like in the movie because like having worked on it for so long in other capacities, the
Yeah.
amount of time that I actually spent working as an actor on this movie was like maybe 2 weeks, but I've been working on it as a writer and a director for years. So, and I don't even think of it as me when I'm watching it because I can't be, luckily I had a very good editor, Alan Rowe Kelly, who is an independent filmmaker, in his own right. And so I made him. I said, when we're cutting this, if I ever make a decision based on how I look on screen and not how the movie is, I'm like, you stop me right then, because like there's plenty of shots that I'm like, that's a really good acting shot, but I look stupid in it, and it's just like, yep, that's the one we're going with though. So
Right. And then just going back to the kind of we talked there about the format and the digital format and like the original, tape format that was used for the found footage. It's quite interesting as well because there's something quite effective about that in the horror genre. It's quite unsettling. It's got that kind of nostalgic feel that something's quite familiar but also quite unusual. It kind of, and that kind of worked again maybe on a conscious or subconscious level at least. That kind of
yeah,
you're used to this, you're familiar with this format, but also it's quite old-fashioned, outdated. It doesn't really work, but it does work because of that.
yeah, and because it's like stacked directly against like such crisp, clean new footage, it really makes that old footage look even worse, even grainier, even more degraded. And I think that like especially for the horror genre, because I mean horror is all about, it's about the fear and the things that we fear the most are the unknown, and like the reason that found footage films work so well is because you don't know what's around the corner, and things are not in that crisp, clean presentation that we normally get, so we don't, it's a little bit dangerous, and you're right, it's got that nostalgic quality as well, so it's like kind of like that fuzzy idea of a memory from when you were a kid,
Mm-hmm.
things that creeped you out when you were a kid. So I think it taps into several of those different things, and I mean, I love like watching that kind of. I enjoy found footage films when they're done well. It's very easy to not do them well, but I mean, but when they're done well, they're so effective because
Yeah.
you feel like you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and like I said, it's that sense of presence, but also that sense of not being shown something, because your scope of vision in a dangerous situation is only as big as the screen.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
with the wide screen, you sort of get this wider picture, so it's less claustrophobic.
Yeah, and it's great as well. Obviously, you talk about the viewer feeling like they're really there in the found footage environment, but also it's really effective watching you as an actor watching that footage back as a character of themselves, because again, that's something that's not really done in the found footage genre, is taking one character from found footage and transposing that character into a future setting where they're then having to come to terms with that themselves, which obviously fits in with the kind of Lovecraftian cosmic sort of horror that you're going for in terms of this character kind of having their memory lost and then revisiting that in the footage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's also like the thing that really intrigued me was the idea of using like the footage as a flashback to me 10 years ago and having it actually be footage of me 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That was like the really, and I suppose like if you wanted to get even more meta, it was like you would just basically have to watch me watch the movie of me watching the videotape.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just like becomes that like when you put the video camera up to a TV screen and it does that thing there. So
What was it like for you then personally? It feels like very much like a passion project. You kind of talked before the interview about this I forgot the term, was it post performance depression or something like that, where you kind of have that sense of
oh yeah,
um
depression, yeah.
yeah. So linking that back to that idea itself, even back to what you said earlier in terms of what was that like, kind of looking back to the 10, 20 years ago yourself and revisiting that, and kind of it feels like a really personal film because you wanted to make this, you went back and actively said that footage, something sat with me, something was lingering, something I really wanted to go back and look at and explore. So what was that like on a personal level?
I mean, on a personal level, it depends on what day you ask me, kind of thing. Because some days I'm like, why the hell did I do this? So why have I spent so many years of my life working on this thing? But at the same time, like the interesting thing, the biggest thing for me was that like in between there, I also ended up getting sober. And so it represents very like a couple of separate times in my life, like very different times, not only just like the actual time period that I was making the project, but like the like to have that footage of me playing a character when I seeing that from 10 years in the future, and I knowing what happens between that and where I am now, all the ups, all the downs that happened in between. It really does, it gives it that little bit more of a depth, that for me, it wasn't even so much that like this is a passion project that I'm like I have to finish this kind of thing. It was more of that it wouldn't leave me alone, and it was like it's a memory that keeps being built.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of things that won't leave you alone, influences on the film. I mean, I recently just bought, funnily enough, before this film even got in my inbox,
Nice.
I
Yeah.
I
I,
just bought that. So obviously Lovecraft, the influence of Lovecraft and the kind of cosmic horror, but more, I don't know if this was conscious, unconscious, subconscious, whatever it was. I was getting a lot of early Raimi influence. Was that something you kind of really wanted to draw on, or was that something that you just kind of naturally had drawn to and it kind of came out in your work?
I think it's a natural thing.
Right,
It's Raimi and Carpenter are the two that like are all over this movie, but are also all over everything that I do.
right,
Uh, Evil Dead was the first. Evil Dead 2 specifically was the first one, the first horror movie that really for me was like, oh wait, what is this?
right.
This is so much more than I thought possible. So yeah, the Raimi is just in me. I
Right.
like for a long time as an actor, my goal was to be the next Bruce Campbell. That was on my in like the late '90s, early 2000s. That was on my website. It was like Nathan Faudree, the next Bruce Campbell. Like that was what I want. So, and I was just like, I don't care about winning an Academy Award. I don't care about winning a Tony or any of that. If I can win a Chainsaw Award from Fangoria, my life is complete. Um, and the cool thing was is we got the movie that I wrote, A Wounded Fawn,
Hmm.
uh, got nominated for a Chainsaw Award this year. So
Yeah, 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 of course. I think I've actually heard of that film to be covered actually, so that's something to definitely check out as well.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
Raimi in that too. So
and you've won I know you've won like a number of awards and been nominated for a number of awards across sort of indie and horror film festivals across the US. So that must be like a real sort of honor to think about this film that's taken you that time to then have that recognized.
yeah, oh no, absolutely. I mean the it's so hard because like after working on it for so long, I have zero perspective on it anymore. So I like it's not scary to me anymore because I know how it works and everything like that. So when I was putting it out, I was a little nervous because I was like, I don't know if this works at
Right,
all.
right.
Uh, so to have any acceptance of it was huge. The really interesting thing that I ended up finding was that um, we ended up winning more awards in independent film festivals as opposed to horror film festivals.
Yeah,
Uh, like Montreal, London New Wave, the Eight and a Half in Italy, and so like these art house and more independent film type thing, we won best
right.
horror movie, um, which was strange to me. But I was like, okay, this is playing there, but like the some of the bigger horror movie festivals didn't end up taking it. So, but we did get to premiere at the New York City Horror Film Festival,
Yeah,
which awesome. And I live in New York, so
right.
it was a very easy commute as well.
And you
But
won.
a lot of the film, because it ended up coming out 2020 2021, um, didn't play in theaters.
Right.
We all the film festivals were streaming.
Hmm.
Um, so I actually only got to see it on one big screen, and that was the last film festival that we were in.
Right. Yeah, and you won. I know for the New York one, I think you won best sound design there. I think. Yeah, yeah. So that was. I mean, there's loads of aspects of this film that I really, really love. The sound design. We've not even talked about the creature design and the visual effects towards the end of the film, which I honestly don't know how you managed to do that on what I assume was a very tight budget. But whoever was responsible for that, I've got the name somewhere down here.
It was
Is it Alden or was it Christopher? There's one of the two.
Yeah, Chris Steinberger. He was
Yeah.
actually our cinematographer also.
Yes. Yes.
Um, yeah, and the funny thing about that is that I had originally come up with this idea for a practical monster
Right.
that we were going to do like lay in, like, okay, well, green screen, and so I had this kind of costumey thing that I built,
Right.
uh, and we filmed it against a green screen, and it looked awful. It was just horrible. And I was like, well, maybe we can fix it. We'll put some smoke in front of it and you won't need to see it. And then I showed Alan, the editor, and he was like, what is this? I was like, that's the big monster. And he's like, no, Absolutely not. But luckily, Chris was learning Blender while we were.
Right, right.
He was like, "I think I might be able to do this." So, I mean, it ended up taking us 6 months to build that, but you know,
No,
it,
definitely. You can definitely tell the time and effort went into that because I was just watching this from an indie perspective, understanding budgets and time constraints and monetary constraints and stuff like that. And then that happened towards the end of the film, and I just thought that is phenomenal. Like that is brilliant. Like I was very,
oh,
very
cool.
impressed. So
Good. Yeah, I mean, it was like I knew that a lot of it was going to be this a low budget indie thing, so I knew we had to have something at the end that we were building towards. We can't just keep talking about this thing and then not have anything happen. So yeah, luckily that worked out, which was great.
yeah, yeah. And then we haven't even talked about the acting, and the acting I think is phenomenal. Again, names elude me. Is it Leela Dean or Layla Dean and Katie
Yeah,
Gibson, the two
yeah.
sort of leads beyond yourself? What was it like, sort of directing them and then directing them as an actor as well? What was that kind of chemistry and interaction like?
Well, I had worked with both of them. Like they're both from. I was living in the Syracuse, New York area at the time, and doing a lot of theater. And so I had actually just worked with Katie,
Okay.
Catherine. I just worked with her in Macbeth. She played my Lady Macbeth.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I was like, when we were wrapping up the show, I was just like, I wrote a part for a movie, and she was like, okay, yeah, that sounds awesome. Um, and Layla, I actually knew from seeing her do a bunch of different theater, and she's also an accomplished musician. And if you meet Layla in real life, she is very much like a rock and roll kind of girl.
Right.
Uh, so I just thought it would be really much more interesting to make her a nun.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and because she is not at all like that, but
Right.
it gave the character a much more of an interesting flavor because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because she wasn't just a typical nun. Um, but so I had these, and then all the people that I worked with on the old footage as well. Kelly Ray, Nicole McFarlane, and we just I had the privilege of working with amazing actors, and which was great because as a director, I had my eye on 20 different things. Luckily, while we were setting up shots, Chris would be setting up a shot, and I would talk to the other actors about like what's going on in this scene, and it was always like at the very last minute that I would be like, oh crap, that's right, I'm in this scene too. I need to hang on, let me go in real quick or whatever. So,
Right.
um, but yeah, I think that having been an actor, it gives you like a shorthand on how to talk to actors. So I knew like the things that I needed to ask them, I needed to provide for them, what at the same time as not telling them exactly how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And then for yourself, then as an actor and having to almost direct yourself, what was it like? Not only having to direct yourself, you're effectively playing two characters.
Yeah,
I want to say,
yeah.
uh, at least two characters in the even just in the modern section of the film.
Yeah,
How was it like to play around with that as well?
that it I mean, I'd been living with the character for so long, and I had like I wrote the script, so I knew exactly what I was going for. And luckily, I had Chris and Megan Pachowski were both on set as producers as well. And I trusted them. I've worked with them before, so I was very much like, I'm going to do it. You just let me know if I'm screwing this up. I'm like, if it's too over the top, if it's too blah blah blah, I'm going to do it. I'll let you know. If I think it's okay, but if I'm messing up, you let me know and stop me. So I got really lucky with that. And then in the post production, Alan was able to cut out all the parts where I was like, I can't remember what my line is because I looked at it. So we ended up being able to get a good performance out of it anyway. So
Yeah, and it is beautifully shot and beautifully edited. Like the editing is really, really good. What was in terms of editing as well? I forgot to ask this earlier in terms of the found footage component of the film. How much of that were how much did you end up shooting for that original film, and how much was used in this film, and how much was cut, or did you use most of the footage, or was there quite a lot that was actually left
We
out?
used quite a lot of the old
Right,
footage.
right,
Yeah, the thing is that I was fairly sure that we would not be able to get a full feature out of the footage for the old footage. So we were able to get, I think it was like a 20 minutes, and there was probably about 35, 40 minutes in total.
right.
So a lot of it. And it kept getting, as we integrated it, it kept getting, we tightened it up, so it was getting less and less. But yeah, we used quite a bit of it. And then the present day footage we ended up filming in 1 week.
Right.
Um, and then a couple more reshoots when we realized, oh, we forgot this shot, or we need this shot, or to some to like add some extras, some to add some exterior shots, things like that. So yeah, it was like every time we thought we were finished filming, it was like, oh no, we need to go back and film more. So
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, if you had like 40 minutes of the original found footage, what was because the modern aspect kind of revitalizes and almost shapes a new narrative for the characters. So, what was the original story going to be with the original footage?
the original story was basically the like the expedition that goes horribly wrong. I go through the circle,
Okay.
back,
Right.
possessed by something, and
Yeah.
then I killed everybody. That was it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that was like literally the last shot of the original footage was me running at the camera guy with an axe.
Right.
So
Okay.
which
Okay.
it was a cool shot, and we didn't actually really use it in the actual movie. Like it's in there in a couple spots,
Right.
but yeah, that was the gist of it. So it was a pretty simple storyline.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
then
then yeah,
yeah, just to pick up then, and just about mindful of time. Obviously, we've been talking for half an hour, and I could talk to you for probably for another half an hour. But
yeah, totally.
um, just in terms of you mentioned there as well earlier about the film festivals and how it had been sort of picked up by a lot of Indian, sort of indie film festivals as opposed
Yeah.
to maybe out and out horror festivals. I think that's perhaps reflective actually of the film because I think it is a horror film. However, I think there's that horror is kind of very unsettling and sort of creepy and mysterious tension based horror, which works perfectly because there's a couple of moments in the film where I was terrified and actually
Okay.
physically jumped because I wasn't expecting it to be that kind of typical jump scary tropey horror film because you'd
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of built up this really sort of tension based narrative. So that worked really well actually for those to disarm you for those sort of 1 or 2 moments that really make you jump. So that worked really well actually.
Good. Oh, that's really good to hear because like that was the thing is like I knew right from the beginning that this was going to be like that dread, that tension, slow burn ish kind of thing. Um, and I kept like when there is one scene that has a little bit of blood in it kind of thing, and I had created this elaborate appliance, and I was going to have like throat ripping and all this other stuff, and it was going to be gory as hell, and everybody was like, that's not this movie. And I'm like, someday I'm going to get to someday, not this movie though. So
But yeah, no, thank you very much for talking to me. Just before we wrap up, then, what's next then for Nathan Faudree? What's next on the cards? Is there another film coming or?
uh projects in the works. I've got another script that I wrote that is suppose depending on how the strikes end up playing out.
Yeah.
One script that I wrote that is being filmed this fall with by Brad Rago. He directed Cryptid this past year. And then I have another script that I've developed that's again kind of like a mixed thing. It's theater and film, so
Okay.
we'll see where that goes. But then I've got a bunch of other scripts that are in development right now, so So yeah, so I'm hopefully, in the next couple of years there will be some more stuff coming.
Perfect. Sounds good. I will look forward to watching it.
Awesome.
Thanks for watching, Super Friends. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button just down below and hit the bell so that you can get notified whenever we release brand new videos. In fact, there's 2 more waiting for you to watch right here below. So what are you waiting for? Why not click play?